My name is Brenda Shavito. I've been a member here since 1992 and raised both our boys here at Westminster. And unfortunately, we lost our son, Nicholas, back in 2018 from a fentanyl poisoning. He struggled with mental health issues and substance disorder. And since that time, I was led to start up a nonprofit called Angels Against Addiction. Some of you may be aware through church. But we help provide financial assistance for people seeking help out of inpatient facilities into recovery houses. And also here doing these presentations with Kathy, raising awareness and lowering the stigma and trying to, bring more awareness to this crisis that we've been facing in our country. So I thank you for coming for this life-saving technique. Like you had said earlier, it's so elementary and easy to use. So thanks. And I'll just turn it over to Kathy from Chester County.
So my name is Kathy Collier. I am the prevention manager at the County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. And before we jump into the training, I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Despite our name, you don't actually come to our offices for the services themselves. We are what's called a single county authority. And that means we are the entity through which state and federal funds flow to provide these services when people actually pass budgets to allow that to happen. We're having a little bit of creative things going on right now to ensure that we can continue to provide services. We are very fortunate to be a part of county government, and that means we do have other funding sources beyond just state and federal. We have county tax base, we have opiate settlement dollars. We are now fully a quarter into the fiscal year with not funds flowing to reimburse the services, and we are having to work with our providers. We are an administrative unit, which means we don't do direct service. We contract with a network of providers throughout the county and really throughout the state, because our goal is to ensure that whomever we are getting into service has the right level of care, dosage, and duration of care they need. And if that provider doesn't exist within our county boundaries, we want to make sure we find the one that does for them. So all of that to say, we do a lot of things, and the main part of my job is education and awareness, training and technical assistance to ensure that people know we exist and what we do. I'm going to go into it in a little more detail further in the training about how you would access our services and what to do. But the thing I like to tell people is we are a very resource-rich system, very resource-rich county. But if you do not know what those services are, or you do not know how to access them, or there is some kind of barrier to your access of those services, you're existing in your own resource desert. And so a huge part of my job is to hydrate that desert so that people have the access, have the knowledge. Another portion of my job is to make sure that stigma reduction can happen at the greatest level, because there are many, many people who are afraid to reach out for the help that they believe they might need because they are afraid of the response of people around them, the people in the system, the people in their lives, because there's still a lot of beliefs and cultural ideas and all kinds of things around the notion of behavioral health care. So I need to level set some expectations from the start. Our department believes strongly that substance use disorder is a disease. It is not a moral failing. It is not a character flaw. It is not simply a decision that a person can make and then therefore decide differently. And we believe therefore that it requires care, health care, just as it would if it were a physical or physiological disease. So we come from that position and that construct when we are developing our resources and our network of providers, and when we are delivering our messages about care and how to receive care. And to that end, as we head into this NARCAN training, I know that there are people who have some very strong beliefs about NARCAN. They think it's enabling. They think that the person in the grips of the opiate use disorder is getting what they wanted or what they asked for when they consume this substance, which, as an aside, not all overdoses are intentional or are from recreational use. There are a lot of situations in which there's contamination of other substances with fentanyl or with another opioid, or there are just curious people who see a pill or a substance and decide to try it out because they've been told it's cool. So there's a lot of reasons why that belief system negates a whole lot of other people who find them in the place of overdose. But even for those who are in the grips of a use disorder and are knowingly taking an opioid at that moment, our belief is if we can save that life, then we have the opportunity to get that person into treatment and to a life of recovery. So we don't subscribe to a lifetime limit on how many times you can be Narcan or how much Narcan you can have access to. Because one thing we know for sure is a person that succumbs to an overdose is a person who will never find their way to recovery. But a person who is revived from an overdose has that possibility and has that opportunity. And that's our very core belief as a department, that what we want for everyone that lives in this county is happy, healthy wholeness. And recovery can be a part of that for a person in a substance use disorder, but we have to keep them alive. If we do not keep them alive, that opportunity is lost forever. So I need you to know that, because sometimes I present in situations where people have some very strong beliefs about Narcan, and I'm not here to debate or argue your beliefs. I'm just here for you to understand what ours are and where we work from and how we operate as a department. Another thing I like to tell people is that Narcan is super easy to use. The actual training part of this program is very short, because if you know where the nostrils are in the human body and you are able to make this motion either with an opposable thumb, or for some reason you don't have one, this works too, you can use Narcan to save a life. But what we use this training for is to help people become educated on opioids, opioid use disorder, overdose, and what to do after the revival from the overdose. Because most of the people who come to these trainings, when we do them in community groups and treatment settings and family recovery group settings, they have like a particular person in their brain that they're thinking about. They're not just thinking, I want to carry Narcan in my purse and be, a hero on the street. There's someone in their life, a loved one, a colleague, whatever it happens to be. And so they are carrying a deep amount of responsibility that they need to do this correctly, or they are going to harm that loved one. So I also want you to understand that a person who is overdosing on an opioid is actively dying. You are not going to make that situation worse by your attempt to use Narcan. There is only the possibility that you are going to help them. And I want to start there so that some of the stress, because people do carry this sense of responsibility that I am somehow going to do it wrong and we are going to end up in the negative result. And it's almost impossible to do Narcan wrong, but even if you did, that is not what caused the problem. What caused the problem was the onset of the overdose to begin with. So with that being said, let's launch into the meat of this. There's a few things we're going to learn by the end of this training: how to recognize an overdose, what the progression into overdose looks like, how to administer Narcan. As I just said, that's the shortest part of the training, because that part is pretty easy and self-explanatory. To be familiar with the Good Samaritan law, because that is actually what allowed Narcan to become available popularly. Prior to that, only allowed in medical settings or with EMTs. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the after the revival, what to do, because we don't just want people to come out of an overdose. We want them to get linked to service and be able to find their way to treatment and hopefully that life of recovery. So what is an opioid? I need you to understand the purpose of these trainings is not to shame the use of painkillers. People have very real need to reduce the pain in their life, and an opioid can be very effective in that. And that's at their core what an opioid is. It's meant to reduce pain. And you can see some of the names on the screen of the commonly used pain medications in hospital and medical settings. And then you also can see that another kind of opioid is heroin. And this is kind of the crux of the issue of how we got to the problem we have with pain medicine use. When these medicines were initially put on the market, they were touted as an absolute miracle cure-all with no negative side effects and no addictive properties. We now know that second two things to be absolutely untrue, but the first still remains true. They are very effective at reducing the sensations of pain. And the way they do that is they go to a particular receptor on the brain called the mu receptor, and it sits there and it tells your body to process what it's feeling differently. And it essentially does that by slowing your respiration, slowing your circulation. And you can understand why, if you have entirely too much of that in your system, if you are slowing your respiration and slowing your circulation, you can end up with a problem. But the truth of the matter is, for their purpose, they were very effective. They come in many forms. Most of what you see in common use is powder, tablets, or capsules. Occasionally the cough syrup, like with the codeine in it. The patches and the injectables, those are usually in surgical and medical settings because that's the highest doses of it. But all of these have appropriate reasons to be used, and they are very effective. And they create a sense of no pain in the body that they are impacting. And that has valid medical use. The problem is, no one really understood that to your body, a synthetic or pharmaceutically manufactured opioid is the same thing as heroin. Your body processes it the same way. Your body can become dependent on it in the same way. And so when people started using them, they didn't have that information. I strongly believe if these medicines had been put on the market with that knowledge, people would have taken more educated steps and been advocates for themselves. There would have been much more of that. If you've ever taken a steroid, you know how you generally get stepped up and then you're on your medicine for whatever period of time and then they step you down because they know what they know about the potential negative side effects of steroids and they don't want people to be negatively impacted. But what happened with these, people began taking them as prescribed for the purpose prescribed, and they became physically dependent on them. And when they stopped taking them, they felt bad. And they didn't realize they felt bad because their body was actually withdrawing from a substance that had become physically dependent on. So they assumed whatever their injury, illness, whatever the reason was that they've been prescribed this medication, they still needed it. So we got into these cycles of people continuing to use the pain med because both they themselves and their practitioners didn't have a full understanding of, oh, you're not still in pain from your shoulder surgery. You are now physically dependent on this opioid, and we have to wean you off and go through steps. And it ended up in a place where people were taking these for months at a time for situations that didn't need it, and then found themselves in a problem. Now, not all physical dependence necessarily leads to a use disorder. But one of the other potential effects of an opioid is a sense of euphoria. Now, I want to be clear, if you're in pain and somebody gives you something that takes that pain away, yes, you're going to feel happy and better. But euphoria is different than that. Euphoria is an overall sense of all is right in the world. Not only is my shoulder no longer tweaked, my children are not irritating me, my finances are great, and I actually kind of like my job now. That's what euphoria is. And so at that cross section where you have a physical dependence and a psychological dependence, that's where you end up in an opiate use disorder. Because even when you are physically weaned off of that, you are craving that sense of all is right in my world. How do people end up in overdose? Very, very few people wake up in the morning and say, I want to wreck my life by coming to the brink of death. That's not how this generally happens. Most people who have an opiate use disorder have developed that physical tolerance for it, so they need to take more and more and more to get the same effect, and then they reach that dangerous brink where the amount they need for that sense of being high has crossed over to too much for their body to handle. And here's the thing about a person in an opiate use disorder. They're having the best high of their life right before they are dying. And they don't know that difference because obviously when they're dying, they're now unconscious. So they're not processing this in a way that those of us who don't have a use disorder might. But there's a lot of other reasons overdose occur. It's not all people with opiate use disorder. It can be people who get a hold of something else that's been adulterated with a fentanyl or an opiate, or they didn't fully disclose to the doctor all the variety of things they take, and then they take this pain med with their something else, and it's a problem. It's also dependent on the method of administration. It's a little bit harder to overdose on pills simply because you have to swallow and consume the larger amount than it is to overdose on the injectables, because you can have stronger concentrates and it's just a faster delivery method. And because of that, you get all of the effect very rapidly, and you just can consume more of it at a time. To be clear, people absolutely do overdose on pills, but the delivery method can impact that. But I did want to talk about this period of abstinence because there is a phenomenon in people who are newly in recovery of a relapse leading to an overdose death. And the reason for that is the first thing that happens for an opioid use disorder when you're entering treatment is generally a physical detox from the substance. Not a pleasant experience for the person going through it, but they get this entirely out of their system, which means their physical tolerance level over the time they are in treatment drops significantly. If they leave treatment and then decide, you know what, I don't like this life of recovery, those voices in my head saying I need this substance or too much to overcome. If they go and relapse and they consume at the same level they were at upon entering treatment, their body no longer has the same physical tolerance. So it's a very dangerous period of time for people in recovery. They really need to be educated on the fact that you are not at the same place you were 28 days ago or however long it was. Your body has lowered its ability to tolerate and absorb the opioid. And then, of course, using alone is always a danger because there's nobody around you watching the signs and having any sense of what's happening with you. I do want to point out that this isn't our first overuse of an opiate situation. There was a period of time where actual heroin and opium itself were presented as medical care, health care, drugs right there on the grocery store shelf, buy your aspirin and everything else. And this was like pre-acetaminophen and ibuprofen and is it NSAID that Aleve is? These are like sort of the options on the market, aspirin and opium. So you can imagine which one was way more popular because anybody who's ever tried to cure anything with aspirin knows that's not super effective. So we've had an earlier struggle with this and somehow did not transfer the knowledge when pharmaceutical opiates were brought onto the market that these were the same thing and could lead to the same problem. And how do we get from that pill consumption to a heroin issue? The real truth of the matter is it's cost. It is much more expensive to fuel a pill habit than it is to purchase heroin. And we happen to live in a place in the country where some of the purest and cheapest heroin in the world is available. Where we are near railroads and ports and highway systems and airports. And the illegal drug trade uses all the same distribution methods that any other business does. So if you are somewhere where there is over-the-road trucking and railroads and airports and ports, you are somewhere where almost anything can be accessed and accessed easily. And I know that a lot of people like to tell themselves that illegal drugs are only available some dark, scary other portion of the world. Not true. The reality of the matter is if you were desirous of it, you could find it in every corner of this county. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter your zip code, doesn't matter your socioeconomic demographics. It's literally available anywhere. And two other things to note is because it's so pure and just super high quality, it doesn't require needle use. The heroin available now can be snorted. So one barrier that some people did have to crossing the bridge to this particular consumption is a needle fear. And it also is generally less disgusting looking than the heroin that used to be available in the earlier waves. If you've ever heard the phrase black tar heroin, there was a reason it was called that. It looked like black tar. It was sticky and gross and needed to be heated up. And all of that was actually a barrier for some people. There was just, bridges they refused to cross. I will not get this nasty substance. I will not inject myself with a needle. We are now in an era where those barriers do not exist. So that is how we reach this point of rampant use. And at around 2017, and we'll get into the data for Chester County, but around 2017, we peaked statewide, nationwide, and countywide for our highest level of overdose deaths. That also coincides with when NARCAN started to be more readily available. So we peaked, and then this came on board and people had access to it, and we started halting and reviving people from those overdoses. We unfortunately statewide has seen it ratchet back up almost to the same heights as it was before. Countywide, we've done a little bit better. Want to say that It's very easy to just look at these as data points. These are people. Each one of these is somebody's human, their loved one, their colleague, their friend, their counterpart, their mentor, whatever it happens to be. So no number is an acceptable number, but what we really liken to our continued downward trend is we have had the ability to be out there training on NARCAN, distributing NARCAN, and creating a bridge in our hospitals from overdose revival to treatment and hopefully a recovery. And I'm very specifically using the word overdose revival because in the beginning of NARCAN, people would say reverse or cure an overdose. That isn't actually exactly what happens. It literally just halts the overdose. And if that person doesn't get to care and doesn't get medically stable, they can be in danger very shortly thereafter from the revival. We continue to see fentanyl as a major reason for our overdose deaths. And I just want to say the numbers that we count are only accidental overdoses. If there is any indication on the scene that this was a conscious choice to consume to the point of overdose and death, they do not count in the numbers that we use for our overdose, our accidental overdose death, and they only count those things for which the consumption of the drug and the opioid itself was the cause of death. If they had other things on board and perhaps it was an alcohol poisoning that led to the death prior to the amount of opioid, or if it was anything where they had consumed substances and then fell, drowned, or in a car accident, ended up in a violent incident, whatever it happens to be, that doesn't count in those numbers because technically it was not the substance that led to the death. See also if it was they consumed something that triggered another congenital issue like heart or seizure or whatever it happened to be. None of those are actually counted in this number. So all of this to say, there are well more people in our county dying each year who have these substances in their system, but the actual accidental overdoses have really been on a downward trend. And we consider it to be a whole host of partners coming together at all levels to raise awareness, to do the training, to distribute the substance, and to create the linkages to treatment post-NARCAN administration. I do want to touch a little bit on the opioid settlement. You might hear a lot of it in the news, and it continues to evolve. There are waves and tiers and phases of this now. The first prominent one was the one that went on after Purdue Pharma and the McKinsey family, who were the main producers of opioids in the very beginning and were found to be liable for having not been fully disclosing of information they actually did have. When I say we didn't know or we didn't understand, it was because we were not informed by the people who had studied, researched, and produced these medications. Huge amount of money coming in, but the reality is it's a huge amount of money coming in because it was a huge amount of loss, deaths, families, communities, all kinds of things negatively impacted because we simply weren't informed, we weren't told. I truly believe at my core, had people understood from the jump that this is merely heroin in a pill, there would still be people that became dependent on it, just as there are people dependent on all kinds of substances, but it would not have had the vast effect that it did. But the good news is part of what has enabled us to distribute NARCAN at the level that we can is we use opiate settlement money to provide that. We are able to take that money in and try to find the risk factors underlying opiate use disorder and dismantle them. Oops. I don't know why it's saying make a call. There we go. We also do other things. We aren't just out here trying to be at the okay, let's stop the death end of things. We are largely trying to make sure that we stop that first misuse. If you can prevent the first use or the first misuse, you have the best chance ever of not having to deal with an opiate use disorder. So a huge part of it is medication safety, getting these medications just destroyed and away from people. Most of us are very bad about actually finishing a prescription. And certainly once we became aware that pain meds could have these problems, that you could become physically or psychologically dependent, a lot of people take as little of it as possible, and then it ends up in a medicine cabinet, a bureau drawer, glove compartment of a car. And so we raise awareness of how you can get rid of these. We have sites all throughout the county. We also have 2 take back days a year in partnership with the DEA. The next one is actually coming up on October 25th. And the idea is just get it out of people's hands, and therefore nobody can be using it improperly. We work with groups that tend to be around people who might have tons of medication, like hospice groups and senior living centers and elder education groups, because at the end of life, there's very often a lot of medication, and people just don't know what to do with it at the end. So we want them to be aware of how to just destroy it and get it out of circulation. We do also work with realtors, and people often find this one fascinating, but there are many, many people who go to open houses who are not remotely interested in buying a house. They are nosy. They've always wondered what that weird room over your garage is. And so now they get a chance to walk through. Or they watched the trucks come and realize you did a major renovation of your basement or your kitchen, and they just want to see how it turned out. There are also people with nefarious reasons. They're hoping you didn't lock up your electronics or your jewels or your whatever else they can grab easy. But there is a segment of people who come and shop through your medicine cabinets. So we train realtors to train their customers to, if you are going to lock up valuables, whatever you do to do that, get your medicines out of the medicine cabinet or the nightstand or wherever you might have it in your house, because the people who are looking for things are going to find those and take them with them. We do a lot of work with the physicians and the medical community. You would think that they are the most knowledgeable people on this subject, but the truth of the matter is, if you are not a physician specializing in substance use or addiction or that kind of disorder, you get a couple days here and there across your education. So we want to make sure they understand all of this at that level and that they know what the most current guidelines are. There was a period of time where if you went to any ER for any pain-related reason, you could walk out with a pretty significant amount of opioids. Now you might get 2 to 3 days at most, and the idea is you need to get back in front of your primary care person. They are the ones that know your medical history. They are the ones that can prescribe best for you. And that has stopped a lot of people who kind of ER shopped. Back pain was a very common thing. Show up with a tweaked back, walk out with 2 or 3 weeks of this medication. Now you're going to get 2 or 3 days. And then the other piece of it is we have a prescription drug monitoring program, which means these entities all talk to each other now. Didn't used to be the case. I could go to my primary care on Monday, and then I could go to my OBGYN on Wednesday, and I could go to my orthopedic the following week, and I could just keep asking for prescriptions. And now, when I go to my primary care on Monday, if I go to my OBGYN on Thursday and I'm saying this, he's going to be able to look it up and go, it's very odd, Kathleen, that you would need more pain med because you were prescribed 10 days of it on Monday. You should not have consumed all of that by now. And the other thing truly is also just to get people in front of their care providers, because there is a wealth of ways to manage medicine. And we kind of lost sight of that. We just went strict to the pill, it takes it away. So I also say to people, you know, if you've had your teeth pulled on Friday and you are an otherwise healthy, let's talk about wisdom teeth. Like if you are an otherwise healthy teenager that has had their teeth pulled on Friday, you should not be in excruciating agony 72 to 96 hours later. And if you are, you need to get back to a care provider because you potentially have an infection or a dry socket or something else going on. And that's kind of the approach we're taking, is the pain is the symptom of something. And if it's not going away, we need to address the something. And it is all having a positive impact on these overall numbers. And this is mostly my role. This is what I do and my part of the department does. We are everywhere all the time on every medium. We have TV commercials, radio ads, billboards, bus shelters, more printed material than you can imagine. And we have even moved into the digital age, and we have both static and rolling ads on all kinds of social media and websites. We want people to know we exist, that help is out there, that you can access it, and that here's steps you can proactively take to make your life healthier and better. And naloxone access is really the cornerstone. And we started by giving it to all of our first responders. Believe it or not, prior to that law change in 2014, the only first responders that had naloxone generally were paramedics, not EMTs, not fire, not police. And who is normally the first on the scene of something? It's one of those three. So we started there. We work with schools and universities. We work with all of our county buildings. And we have participated in statewide distribution days where we literally just open up a conference room in our county buildings and say, come take it with you. And the partnership for the trainings that we now do started in 2014 with Good Fellowship Ambulance, the District Attorney's Office, the Health Department, and the Police Chiefs Association, because we recognize that it's not enough to just deploy people with NARCAN. We need them to understand how to get people to help and how to get them medically stable. And what the Good Samaritan Law, which was the crux of all of this, if you've ever been trained in CPR or first aid, you may have been given some information around similar and adjacent laws. It basically says that if you provide NARCAN with good intentions in the manner that's it is intended to be used, you are not responsible for the outcome of whether or not this person ends up revived and healthy and going forward. And there's some other nuances in the law because there was a phenomenon of people who were consuming together. If someone was overdosing, they would bring them to like the steps of a police department or the parking lot of a hospital, and then they would drive away and call 911 because they themselves didn't want to get in trouble for their use. And unfortunately, in the minutes it took to do that, people were dying by the time they were discovered in the parking lot or on the steps. So there's some parts of the law that say, if you make that call, regardless of what you were consuming and doing at that time, you will not end up with criminal consequences for staying with your friend and calling 911. Now, there's some caveats to that. If you're committing other crimes actively while you were consuming the drugs, this is not a get out of jail free situation where you can rob, pillage, do whatever, and then call 911 for your overdosing friend and you are in trouble. It's literally, you cannot be held responsible for your consumption in that moment. And it's a one person in the group call. So if you are in a group of 12, generally speaking, what happens is one person calls, one person is overdosing, and the other 10 scatter. But it isn't one of those that we can have a raucous good time and then call 911 and none of what we are doing will we be held liable for. But it has improved the situation. So we're here today to talk about naloxone. NARCAN is its brand name. I most often say NARCAN because it just rolls off my tongue easier than naloxone. But what it is a halter of an overdose. I mentioned in the beginning that opioids sit on the mu receptor of your brain. And what NARCAN does is it goes into your brain and it kicks the opioid off it. Now, that doesn't mean the opioid actually leaves your body. It just means that your brain no longer realizes there is opiate in it. And so it's no longer processing in that same way. So your respiratory system and your circulatory system re-engage because your brain doesn't think or realize that the opioid is in there. It's very important for me to stress the opioid is still in your body. And that is why we consider it so important that after the revival from the overdose, a person gets to medical care. Now, it's also important to note, NARCAN only works on opiate overdoses. So if something else is going on, some other substance is consumed, it's a seizure, it's a heart attack, whatever else led to the person being unconscious in your presence, NARCAN isn't going to have an impact, but it's also not going to have a negative impact.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
About the half-life of the opioid?
About 45 minutes to 45 to 90 minutes for NARCAN to be effective in your body, and opioids generally last longer than that, which is, it depends too on when they started and how much is
there.
How much is there, the size of the person, the history of their use. There's a lot of factors, but that's why I say it's super important to go from revival to medical care because NARCAN can wear off. And depending on how much opioid is in that body, that can be a problem.
Temporary.
Yeah, that's why I say revival, not reversal, because reversal sounds like, you know, it's no longer happening. And all it really is just a halting of what was happening. Now, there's also an important thing to note that there's a very fine line. I mentioned in the beginning that people who end up in a state of overdose are generally having the best high of their life just before they are overdosing. And there's a fine line between that over-medication and an overdose. And it's important if you are with someone who seems to be over-medicated that you not just go, oh, they're good and leave because they can topple over that line very easily. It's also unnecessary to use Narcan on someone who's simply over-medicated. They're just super high and it's going to wear off like every other time that it has weared off for them. And they are, I'm not going to say fine, because obviously something is going on, that they have an opiate use disorder and are super high, but they're not in danger of dying. You do not need to use Narcan on them. However, the signs of overdose are pretty much just everything that over medication is, but a little higher degree of it. So they stop from being sleepy to being unconscious. They stop, or they move from slowed respiration to no respiration, slowed circulation to no circulation. And that's when they're in danger of dying. So if you are with people who are using and you notice one of them is super, super medicated, stick around, but don't use the Narcan until they've crossed over that line, because it simply isn't unnecessary, and all it's actually going to do is knock them out of that high, and it's not going to win you any friends or favors when you do that. And it's certainly not going to put them in a mindset to hear from you, hey, you're consuming too much and I was worried about you. An opiate overdose can affect all of these systems in the body, and it affects all of them negatively. Now, when used properly, it's using these systems to help you not feel the pain that you're feeling. But when overused, it's literally shutting down and killing off necessary physiological systems, which is how you end up in an overdose death. So what's the first thing you do? Like any other medical emergency, you call 911. And then you try to ascertain, is this person over-medicated or overdosing? If you shake them and they revive, they are simply over-medicated. But if you try to get their attention, you know, the whole, if you've been through the CPR, Annie, are you okay moment? If they respond, then this is not an overdose. If they do not, then you can begin to think, okay, what's going on here? And you should check around. Again, most of the time when I'm training people, there is someone in their life that they are being trained for, so they know very well that it is most likely an opioid overdose. But if you happen to just be on the scene of something, look around and see if there's obvious, is there paraphernalia? Are other people around them using the opioid? Is someone saying to you, Annie consumed too much? And then if you ascertain that this appears to be an overdose, because you might look around and realize, oh, they just pulled him out of the water. This person possibly drowned. Or, oh, toppled over a ladder. This person probably has a head injury from a fall. Like there's a lot of context clues you can take to realize maybe I'm not dealing with an overdose. But if you have what little information you have and it appears that it could possibly be useful, you then move into the administration of the Narcan. You will see when you open up your doses in there that it comes in a box of 2 doses. It has a blister seal, you know, foil seal like most medications do, and it is a plunger nasal spray system. If you've ever used an Afrin or a saline or a Flonase, it's a similar kind of thing, with the difference of Narcan is dosed for the dose it needs. It's only going to be dosed for that use, and it doesn't, like, it's not a reusable thing. But it also means you don't have to calculate weight, height, whatever, and try to mix things. You gently put it into the nostrils of that person, you spray it in, then Narcan goes up into their body, and then you wait for a reaction. Now, I will tell you, if they're absolutely not breathing and they're absolutely not circulating, you do have to start by getting them breathing and circulating, because it won't work if they can't actually get it into their system. But you give the Narcan administration into the nostril, up the nose, and then you put them in the recovery position, and you might want to stand back and slightly away from them. And it should work fairly quickly, like 90 seconds tops. If it doesn't have an impact, you can try a second dose. That's why the boxes have 2 of them in there. I do recognize that if you are looking at your loved one, you might empty every dose you have on access to. For most cases, if after the second dose the person isn't reviving, then it is either not an overdose at all, not an opiate overdose, or they have simply already passed. Because as I mentioned, Narcan only works on an overdose. So if it's not an overdose at all, it's not having an impact. If it is not an opiate overdose, it's not going to have an impact. But if it is too late, they have already passed. But we do recommend you try the 2 doses. And then the reason we say move them into a recovery position, this is just a reminder to keep yourself safe at all times. We're not out here to be heroes that harm ourselves in the process of saving someone else. You gotta know your situation and know if you can act in it. But you move them into the recovery position because the revival from an opiate overdose is not a pleasant experience for the person who's going through it. Because what actually is happening is their body no longer realizes that there is opiate in their system, so they are going into immediate withdrawal. And withdrawal is a pretty physically violent thing for people with an opiate use disorder. They can have sort of spasms, vomiting. They're also going to potentially be incredibly confused because they were having a fantastic high. They did not know they were dying. And now they are in withdrawal. And that is very discombobulating for a person going through those things. They might be angry, agitated. It is highly unlikely that they are going to sit up and thank you for saving their life. In fact, the probably primary thought in their brain is going to be, how can I go access more opiates so I stop feeling this horrible? Which is why it's super important to have called 911 and have the professionals there to manage that, the people that know how to do restraint, the people that can possibly get them to the hospital to get medically stabilized. And I would tell you the reason why it's super dangerous for them to just get up and walk away is twofold. One, to your point, there is a half-life of naloxone that doesn't necessarily match up to the half-life of the opiate they've consumed. So if they just wander off, they're potentially going to fall right back into that overdose when the naloxone wears off. The other reality is, as long as the naloxone is effective in their body, they're not going to know that their body isn't responding like there's opiate in it. They're going to go seek more opiate. And until the naloxone wears off, no matter how much opiate they consume, their brain and their body is not going to respond as those. So they could be at a very dangerous point when the naloxone wears off. So we strongly recommend get medical care there, get help. It does not mean that everybody agrees to go to that care, but it's at least the best chance we have. So how do you obtain naloxone? There's a variety of different ways. It used to require a subscription. So there was both the go to your family physician or a health clinic, or there was a standing order from the Pennsylvania Physician General. It doesn't require a prescription anymore. It is available over the counter. Insurances tend to only pay for the one that comes in the auto injector form. There are two other ways that it's sold, the kind that we distribute, and then a different one that is like a multi-piece. It was what we gave out in the beginning because it was the only commercially available one, easy to obtain. It has like a vial of the Narcan and then a syringe that you put in and a nose piece. As soon as we were able to get a hold of the nasal sprays, we moved that way because people in the moment of a crisis having to put pieces together and vials of naloxone were just isn't the best thing for the non-medically trained. And honestly, even for the medically trained, if that's your loved one, having to deal with in that way. So we distribute the nasal spray form of it. It comes in a box of 2 doses, and it is free of charge to anybody who brings it to us or requests it from us. We will get it to them. And the other message I really do want to leave people with is recovery is possible. Said in the beginning, I like to reduce the stigma. I also like to hype up the concept of recovery because for a lot of people, it seems like everything and everyone they've ever known is going to have to change if they're going to enter recovery, that life is not going to be fun, the ways they know how to spend their free time, all of those things are going to be negative. And we really like to get the word out there that people recover every day in this county. There are thousands of people living happy, healthy, and whole lives of recovery, and they are just as full and just as complete as anyone else is. So that is why a large part of what we do is make people aware of how to get to treatment. Now, access to treatment is determined by whether or not you're insured or uninsured. If you are insured commercially, you do have to go through whatever process your commercial or insurance carrier requires. So you refer to the back of your card, you start that process as you would for any other service you get through your insurance. But if you are uninsured or underinsured, and underinsured refers to those people that might have like a public assistance insurance, but it only covers physical care, not behavioral care, you can get funding from us to provide for your treatment service. And we start with an assessment. That's the first step of the process of getting people into care. We have sites throughout the county. They're fairly geographically spread, but we are a very large county. So we do have some transportation assistance we provide to get people to appointments. But the point of the assessment is to take in as much information as we can about the person with the use disorder and figure out what the best level of care, location, type, duration, all of those things would be for that person. Now, I will caveat that an assessment is only as good as the information given to that assessor. And sometimes the person given the information isn't the best reporter of their life. Sometimes it's a conscious decision. They're across the desk from a stranger, supposedly needing to spill all the most intimate details of everything they do in their life. Also, if they have had any intersection with the system, it has generally not been a positive intersection. So once again, across the desk from a stranger in a system that maybe hasn't been kind to them. But the other reality too is many people in a use disorder are lying to themselves, and therefore the information they give the assessor isn't going to be accurate because they really believe they have got this under control. It was just a misstep. They won't overuse again. They're fine. It's all good. So all of this to say, sometimes the first placement isn't really the best placement. Sometimes it takes nuance and tweaking and the experience of that person actually in treatment to realize what they really need. But we have all of these levels of care. They exist on a continuum, but it isn't like a stepping stone continuum. You don't have to start at lockdown rehabilitation center and then if you succeed there, move to something lower. Neither is it, everybody goes to outpatients first, and if you fail that, we move you up to higher levels of care. It's really based on whatever about your life and your history and your drugs of choice and your physical care and other situations that the placement is made. And then within those placements, within those levels of care, there are varieties of treatment in that level because some people need to take children with them. Some people need their care in another language. Men and women are often not in the same facility. Adolescents are not with adults. There's all different kinds of nuances. But all of that to say that the goal is to get a person to the placement for the dose and duration of care they need to find their way to recovery. That is the goal of all of our work, and everything we do with people with use disorder is to get them into recovery. And then I just wanted to tell you, we do have an information and referral line. This is not a hotline. This is a resource and information line, Monday through Friday, like 8:30 to 5. But there are people trained in Chester County on the other end of that line. We also have statewide resources and hotlines, and on the back table, I have information about our human needs network within the county. We took in-house the 211 system. So it's no longer regionally based, Monday through Friday, like 8 a.m. to, I think it's actually 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. You get an actual Chester County resource navigator on the other side of that. And then the other piece of it is the 988 line, and that is a crisis line. And that is staffed 24/7 by navigators who are in our county government service office, who are there to walk people through what to do in that need. And then there are two other pieces to the needs network. There's the team, the mobile crisis team that can deploy to locations if necessary. And then there are crisis centers that people can walk into. The goal of all of this is for people to know that help is available, that it's out there in a variety of places and forms. And then we just have resources for the non-crisis. I just want to know more. I just want to do better. I want to be stronger in my recovery. I want to feel fulfilled, all of these things. Because as I mentioned, we are a resource-rich county, but lots of people don't know what's out there or how to access it. So all of these things are out there for the purpose of giving people the best information they can to achieve that healthy, happy, whole life. That is our goal for every citizen of Chester County. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions or anything for me? I realize I said a lot of things and I speak very quickly, so.
I have two questions.
Okay.
On the NARCAN,
Yes.
just give me an idea of the average price.
So it depends on which of the formats you're buying.
Let's talk about
The nasal spray kind, I believe is $150 for the 2 doses.
Okay, and you could.
That's commercially if you were to
You
go
could
there.
have it in your house in case a relative is there or a
Yep.
friend comes
You can
in?
have it for whatever reason you feel you want to have
And
it.
is there a shelf life?
There is a shelf life. All of these doses will have their expiration date on the back. What I will tell you is it does not become dangerous when it expires. It just becomes potentially less effective. So, my personal opinion, this is not the county stance. The county says, please, bring back your expired doses and we'll refresh. My personal stance is if you are facing an emergency and you have the option of an expired, potentially less effective NARCAN dose or doing nothing, I'm gonna use the NARCAN dose. And if it's less effective, I'm gonna use 2 doses because as I mentioned at the top of this, the person overdosing is actively dying. I am not gonna speed the process along with ineffective NARCAN. The other thing is that it can react to extremes of temperature, too hot or too cold. Again, does not become dangerous, just becomes less effective. But I will tell you, all of our Chesco Connect buses, our first responder units, our state troopers, all of them carry it in their vehicles. You said you had 2 questions, though?
Well, now the other is really a comment. You probably will find this encouraging. I have to take tramadol. I had serious spinal surgery several years ago, but I only take it on an as needed basis.
Mm-hmm.
And this just happened to me the first time ever. I went into CVS to get the prescription renewed. I think it was either for 60 or 90 pills, I forget. And they would only give me 12 at a time.
That is part of that whole change of
And the
prescription
reason is
guidelines.
to see how often you're taking it,
Mhm.
so on. So they're putting tighter controls.
They have much tighter controls on the pain medicine, and the goal really is to make sure you are continuing to check in with a primary care provider. It used to be that you could leave with 90 days of this medication. And first of all, 90 days of consuming an opioid is probably going to make almost all of us physically dependent. But secondly, it's just not good healthcare. If you're just continuing to mask the pain, but something else is going on, you aren't getting healed from or cured from or just well managed from.
I just want you to know they're putting tighter controls.
That
So
is-
regardless of what the doctor writes, they're only going to give you a certain amount.
Yeah.
And then you got to come back again to get more because it is under the prescription. They won't give you 60 or 90 anymore.
I have a bunch of questions.
Oh, okay.
Do airplanes carry?
I do not know that, honestly. We are on a crusade to anywhere there is an AED, get an Alox box above it and get people having it, but I don't actually know the airplane answer. I don't know if there would be any impact. I know the pressure in a plane. I don't know if a nasal spray would be impacted.
So I'm a dentist anesthesiologist, so I've gotten up once a doctor does not respond to their call.
Yeah.
They get to the nurse level, then I
You
get up.
said-
So I was just wondering if I need to carry my own or if they have.
I mean, I carry my own because I've never actually honestly thought about it. It does count as one of your liquids, so you have to have it in, like.
Okay, was the question, can you get it on an airplane?
Yeah,
Oh, can you board an airplane?
no, he meant, do they carry it on airplanes?
Oh,
And
think
I
there was a
don't,
push to do that.
yeah, I don't actually know
To
that.
do
I do know that I carry it.
I
Oh,
carry.
and if you use it on an airplane,
I've,
somebody's gonna be violent.
yeah, I've never had to use it.
Staff on the airplane needs to
Yeah,
know.
but that's
Yeah, and,
or death.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know.
and my thought too is most likely on an airplane, they move to restraining and doing those things before the revival, like.
Before they actually are that
But
far.
I don't know. I fortunately never encountered it. But I don't actually know the answer. I would hope that they're stocked with Narcan on an airplane because I know they have defibrillators and I'm pretty sure they have EpiPens, but I don't know that answer.
So some of my questions are about recognizing whether somebody has their physical issues because of a drug overdose or because of they're having a heart attack, they had a stroke, and
I mean,
what
it
happens when
is,
you give it to them and.
so it doesn't have a negative effect on people who aren't having an opiate overdose. The only potential negative effect of Narcan is that it can create pulmonary edema because it is a liquid going in. And if people are not actually breathing and respirating, it does just end up in liquid sitting on their lungs. So if you have a person who's had a heart attack or a seizure or something else, and you're shooting Narcan up into the nose, there is the potential of that impact.
And the position you put them in might help with
Yeah.
draining out of the nose
Yeah.
versus down.
And we always recommend, if you are comfortable with hands-only CPR or you have the pump for rescue breathing, you got to get the person circulating and breathing for the Narcan to be fully effective. But some people panic and unload every Narcan around them onto the person. And if it isn't an opioid overdose, that's just creating liquid on the lungs.
And what about the treatment of somebody who has some other issue?
Well, that is why you call 911 and the
Complication.
yeah,
of
that
treating-
is why you call the medical professionals to come, because we're not expecting people to become trained and knowledgeable and able to address and provide medical treatment for all reasons.
But if you give them something, does that affect how they're treated later?
It can, because if they have the pulmonary edema, they're going to have to address that as well. If you simply give them a dose of Narcan and they do not revive, but are not passed away yet, they'll be treated for whatever their thing is.
And maybe management of pain is a little different after that.
Well, we certainly do recommend when the EMTs show up, you state what you've done so that they recognize if there is pain management and they get to the hospital and they give them something and they're not reacting to it, it's because there's Narcan in their system.
So Narcan was available at least 2 or 3 years before I left in-hospital work. And I think out of the 2 to 3 years, I gave it once. And the reason being, most people have incisions or very painful. So it would be easy to take them from
Feeling comfortable.
feeling
Yeah.
comfortable
Yeah.
to be in extreme pain. And it did happen once. Recovery room nurse just
Mhm.
gave them a full dose. So
Yeah, it's very tricky in hospital settings because there's much larger doses of the pain medication usually being given because of the reasons. And then there's other, if a person starts thrashing around and being agitated when they have just had a surgery or an injury or whatever, it definitely creates other nuances. Our training is generally for street use of it when you've, come upon a teammate. Most people I train are not just carrying it around to be Narcan administrators on the street. There are some. Most people are thinking about, I have a loved one with opiate use disorder and I want to keep it in my house in case they come to visit or are over, or I'm on a team with a person who's had a shoulder injury for 12 years and consumes a lot of pain meds and I'm concerned, or things of that nature.
I know somebody who has a lot of need for pain management, a lot of physical
Mhm.
issues. And he had Narcan because he was given opioids to take.
Yes.
And in case he.
And that's becoming increasingly more common.
And
that
so
is-
what happens when they get their Narcan is like their pain medication all gone and they are in extreme.
Yes, and the other danger is they need to alert the others in their lives, because if they already go unconscious from the consumption,
Yeah, they have to do
they
it.
can't administer it themselves.
Yeah.
But it has become increasingly more common to provide Narcan with pain med for those cases of people that are on high doses.
And in that case, give them the full dose. Don't
Yep.
try to give them a little
Yep.
bit to
Yep.
take care of the overdose part.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume, I am not a medical professional, but my assumption is going to be they're going to start with save the life and then manage the consequences of that life-saving attempt. Just like I know when giving CPR, people get cracked ribs and bruised sternums and all kinds of things that have to be managed post-CPR. But if the option is a few cracked ribs and you're alive, that's the choice most people are going with.
And what about the Good Samaritan law? If you're completely off on recognizing the right symptoms and you give them Narcan, are you covered?
The law protects you for having the intent to use it as for the purpose used and in the proper manner, even if it does not expect you to be the medical professional that was able. But we also have to recognize we are a very litigious society. And that doesn't mean a person isn't going to sue you and isn't going to find ways. It just means you are protected within those bounds.
I've been on planes where physicians wouldn't get up. And
I mean, I recognize that we are a society of people who move to the lawsuit very quickly, and we don't think about, okay, yes, they did accidentally rip my $1,000 blouse, but I would have died otherwise. We sue for the value of my $1,000 blouse. You know,
so
it's,
I go explain, I was on an international flight and I was asked to, if I was gonna ask to return to the hospital, I had to do it before they got over the ocean. And so I went and got the physician.
yeah,
Explained, nobody's been sued for trying to save a life. So it wasn't
yeah.
opioid.
I mean, I feel for people whose jobs put them in those positions regularly. I'm truthfully not put in this position often. First of all, because I'm the prevention manager, so I'm not even in the treatment system, but also because we aren't largely direct service. So it's not a daily, like, I gotta keep my Hippocratic oath or my home kind of, you know, choice. It's a shame that that is how people react to persons who are trying to save their lives.
Yeah. And I think I didn't fly a long time, but I flew enough that I had probably 5 situations. And I think there was one where a doctor got up and great.
Yeah.
These weren't overdoses, these are just medical emergencies.
These were one stroke, a couple, mostly anxiety. I have a heart condition, my heart's beating rapidly.
Calm down.
Yeah.
And
Deep breath.
here I have some
Mindfulness, yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions for me? Well, I have a bunch of resources in the back and I do have the NARCAN kits, so please help yourself to them. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do the kids have the contact information for like the different services?
Yes, there's a resource card in every kit.
Okay.
And just so you know, in case you've forgotten everything I said, there is printed on the bag the instructions for how to administer NARCAN and a card inside saying the same thing. And then there's also a card full of resources.
The resource part is part of it.
Yeah.
For the number.
And then the family guide and the gold cards, what's in the kit is the purple card. That is very overdose centric, but then the gold card is just resources in general. The family guide is if it's not you that needs the service, but loved ones. And then I also have the Human Needs Network information back there.
What about other counties? A lot of the resources you mentioned were Chester County.
There are versions of our department in and serving every county. Some of them are different than others. Our surrounding counties, Montgomery and Delaware County, are very similar to us in that they are not direct service. They are administrative units. Berks County is more direct service. Lancaster County is administrative units, but the difference is the philosophy and how much NARCAN going out. We are pretty NARCAN heavy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
In terms of distributing and giving it out to people.
I thought you meant.
We don't have the high, our overdose rates are actually lower than most of our surrounding counties, but we are very, get it out there, get it on the street, give it to everyone. Have it if you need it.
Thank you.